Hello, in this video we'll be learning about for loops and the various different uses you can have for for loops. For loops are really useful when you want to repeat some lines of code a set number of times. That could be a value that is indicating the number of times that something needs to repeat, or it could be, for example, the number of items in a list. So they're a little bit more efficient and require fewer lines of code as opposed to while loops when we want to repeat a set number of times. So let's get started. I'm just going to print hello a few times on the screen here to begin with. Okay, so here you can see I'm printing hello 4 times on the screen. I've got 4 different lines of code to do that. So if I actually want to repeat that 4 times, rather than having 4 different lines of code, I could put that into a for loop like so. Okay, so what I've done here is I've written some code here that says for I in range, and then in the brackets 4. So that 4, you can probably guess, indicates how many times we want this line of code that's in our for loop to repeat. And we know this is inside the for loop because when we enter the colon after the for loop, it's indented across like so. Okay, so if I wanted another line of code to repeat at the same time, like so, we can see that both of these lines of code are part of the loop. So it says for I in range. I is a counter used within the for loop, and we'll come to that later. So in this code, we're not actually making use of this. It's actually a variable that holds the value that refers to the specific loop number that it's looping at that particular time. So yeah, for is a keyword and in is a keyword. So for is a keyword in Python that's used to indicate that this is a loop that's going to be repeating a set number of times, and then in is referring to the next bit which tells the loop how many times it to repeat. And range is a function that we can use to get a specific value that the for loop uses to repeat a set number of times. So if I run this, as you can probably predict, it should say hello goodbye 4 times. Hello goodbye, hello goodbye, hello goodbye, hello goodbye. If I didn't want goodbye to be part of the loop, okay, and I only wanted hello to be part of the loop, I'd leave hello, that line indented in the for loop, and then print, I would remove the indentation. I mean, it doesn't matter if there's a line in between it or not. Print goodbye should now only print after this loop is executed. So print goodbye should print once after hello is printed 4 times. So let's have a look. There you go. So now hello has printed 4 times and goodbye has only printed once. Okay, so that's how to just repeat something a set number of times. If I change 4 to 5, hello will print 5 times, and so forth. Okay, so this I counter in our for loop. So I'm going to show you how we can use that. So if I do for I in range 5 print I, let me show you what this does. So this will print 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm just going to delete that code at the top there. Okay, run that again. Okay, yeah, so it's just printing 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's the actual value of the counter, and that counter by default in a for loop increases by 1 within each loop. So every time this loops round, it's going to print I, and I always, by default, it starts at 0. So this will print I, which is 0 to begin with. So it works exactly like a variable. So then we repeat again. I is increased by 1, and then it'll print 1, so forth. But let's say we want to print the numbers 1 to 5. What we'd have to do is we'd have to add 1 to I. So it started at 1 and went up to 5 like so. Okay, and then there's some variations we can do on that. So let's say we wanted. We don't have to do the +1 there. We can actually set what the starting value is in our range. So there, 1 to 4. Now this value here, so in the for loop, this first parameter in the range function. Now, because when we enter two parameters, so the first one is for where the starting value of I begins at. So here we're saying it needs to start at 1, and the second value is where we're saying it should end at. But actually, in this function, it actually only goes up to 1 less than the value that we want it to end at. So it's actually going to end at 4. So if we wanted to end at 5, we need to change this to 6. And there you go. So that's a different way that you can print 1 to 5. So you can say it starts at 1. You can say if you start. So for example, if you want to start at 2, it'll start at 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So let's change that to 1 and 10. So this now prints the numbers from 1 to 9. So again, up to 1 less than the value of 10. If I wanted that to print all the even numbers within the range 1 to 10, or let's say let's say I wanted to the value of I to increase by 2 rather than increase by 1 in each loop for whatever reason, I can do that as well. So I can do a third parameter here. So by default this is at 1. So this is what's called the step count. So this third parameter is referring to the step count. So if we wanted to the step, the increase of I to go up by 2 each time rather than 1, we put 2 in the third parameter there. So now we'll do 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. And if you change it to 3, 1, 4, 7. Like so. And by the way, you can use the value of I, just like I said, it's a variable. So you can use that in a message, for example, loop number. So loop number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You don't have to call it I as well. You can call it anything you want. You can call it count. And again, anything that would be a suitable variable name, you can call it that as well. So there we go. The next thing that we can do with these parameters, so let's say we want I'm going to keep referring to it as the value of I. Okay, I'm just going to delete the message while we are learning this. So rather than increasing by 1, what I wanted to do is I wanted to start at 10 and go down to 1. Okay, so it starts at 10, ends at 1, but if I leave this at 1, this won't actually print anything because it's still increase 10 by 1 each time, which actually won't print anything. So what I want it to do is I want it to go down by 1. So I'm going to do -1. So let's see what that does. So there we go. So it's going 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. And you can see again, it's not gone down to the 1 that we want for this one. So we're trying to get it down to 1, but what we actually need to do is change this to 0, and then it'll do 10 to 1. So you have to just be very careful with this second parameter of where you want the value of I to go to, or the value of your counter. Okay, the next useful thing with for loops is looping through characters in a string. So if I assign the value Python as a string to the variable word, now what I can do is if I want to loop through every single character in this string that's been assigned to word, what I can do is I can do for I in range and make it loop the length of this string. So I'm going to do len word. Okay, so the length of word, that's going to get the value of 6 because there's 6 characters in Python. Now, if I want to print each character in a particular position, so I'm not sure how familiar you are with accessing individual characters in a string, but if I do print word 1, this will print the character y. That's because y is an index of 1. So this means print the character at index 1 in the string word. So if I change this to 0, this should print p. There we go. And if I change this to 5, this should print n. Okay, so each one of these positions in the string has been assigned what's called an index value, and we can use our counter in a for loop to access those individual characters in a string. So if I do word I, this should print each character in the word Python on a separate line. So Python, like so. Okay, and that's actually, so this actually, the length of word is 6, but the value of I goes from 0 to 5. So that's one of the reasons why by default the range function only goes up to 1 less than the value in that particular function. So the other type of for loop though, so rather than using for I in range, we can write for, and then if I do for character in, and rather than doing range, if I do for character in word, so character is, it's not going to be a counter this time. Character is a variable, but it's going to become each character in the variable word. Okay, so if I do print character, okay, so we should get the same result. So if I just comment out the first one, so for character in word. So yeah, it's going to print Python. So character. So if let's do something with this rather than just print it out. So if I print character and then join that with a string is a letter in the word. P is a letter in the word. Y is a letter in the word. Okay. So this is so I call them for each loops. So this basically loops through each character in the word. So that will automatically access each character in the word. And the same way in the same way that these for loops work with strings, you can also use them in lists. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with lists, but I will explain what they are. So lists are basically like a variable, but they store multiple variables under one name, under one identifier. So here I've got a list called items, and items has got 3 values in it. So they're 3 strings. So the first one is apple, banana, and coconut. And just like in a string, each item in my list has an index value. So apple is at index 0, banana is at index 1, and coconut is at index 2. So if I print items 0, okay, that should print apple. If I print items 2, that should print coconut. There we go. And we can use our for loops to refer to individual items in our list. So if I do for I in range len items rather than word, okay, so this should print each word in our list. let's give this a go. Oh, I'll just delete that. Yeah, apple, banana, coconut. Okay, so that I starts at 0 and it refers to items 0 to begin with, and then it automatically increases by 1, and then it will refer to items index 1, so it will print the items at index 1, which is banana, and then coconut. And then it will automatically stop once I gets to the length of the items, which is 3, and it'll go up to 1 less than 3, which is the last one, coconut. So again, you can use this type of loop as well. So let's change how we've written this. So rather than for character in word, for item, for each item in items, print item. Or let's call it for each fruit in items. Let's see if it also does the same thing. Yeah, so there we go, apple, banana, coconut. So it's taken each fruit in items, so each one of these strings, and printed it. And like I said, so you don't have to call it items, you don't have to call it fruit, you can call it anything you want. Something relevant would be good, but you could just call it F if you wanted to, and it will still do the same thing. Yeah, so that's for loops in a nutshell, really. So yeah, they're really useful for looping a set number of times, either a specific value that refers to the number of times that you want the loop to execute, or looping the number of throughout the number of items or characters in a string, or items in a list or an array. Thank you for listening.